with an edge that looked
skeptical statement. The Mind Cemetery, where the paranoia about the paranormal comes to rest.
Follow us on Twitter and subscribe to us on Facebook. Also, check us out on our website, mindcemetery.com, for show updates and the critically acclaimed Mind Cemetery blog.
It's not critically acclaimed, but you should check it out anyway, mindcemetery.com.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Benetti, and along with Joe Montaldo, we co-host a new show called News on the Flip Side. You can catch us every Saturday night, 8 p.m. Central, where we will be discussing current events and topics going on in the world today. We have opinions on everything. There's no topic that we won't discuss, and we'll go places that other shows wouldn't dare. False history gets made all day, every day. The truth of the new is never on the news, but you can catch it here, News on the Flip Side, only on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network.
You are listening to UPRN 107.9 New Orleans.
Ladies and gentlemen, the world needs to hear the truth.
Welcome to the Church-of-MABUS radio show, everybody. It's Saturday night. We're coming at you live. That's right, live. It's been a long week. I think this Saturn-Mercury retrograde thing's finally ending. I think the 17th or maybe later next week, but it's been rough. Like Mercury and Saturn turning backwards. It's just been a mess. Like a lot of medical stuff from people. Everybody I talked to, medical stuff. I had a breakup this week. I'm single now. That's right, ladies. If there's any ladies out there, I'm single. If you want a bald fat man, I'm here. I'm ready. and Andy just shaved all my body hair off. I'm just kidding. He's in Seattle. I'm in Florida. So that's not humanly possible. He did it from afar with his Mothman powers. I'm just kidding around. But got some announcements. Next Saturday is Audrey Starborn. She's an alien abductee and also does a conference, Experiencers Speak 2. Part 2, 2013, people like Peter Robbins, and I don't know if Travis Walton's going to be there, but a bunch of people. We'll be talking to her next Saturday. And Michael Jagers, my old buddy from high school. Remember him, the zombie from Walking Dead? He plays a zombie in the Walking Dead TV show. He's been a hero zombie. That's when you get to actually be in a big scene and be a hero zombie and eat someone and all that good stuff. So he'll be back to co-host. And then our last show of the month is with Christopher Noel, and Andy will be back with us. And it's about Bigfoot and his book called, I think, Bigfoot Rising 2013, Dead Giants Tell No Tales. So a big Bigfoot show. And then I'll say, let me see, April, our first show is going to be with Thunder White Cloud and Jerry Avalos. They're going to be at the Awake and Aware convention. I believe that's Project Camelot, I think, one of their conferences. And anyway, with Thunder White Cloud he's real big into technology that protects against like weird electronic beam weapons, and it's weird. We'll get into it more, but it's really strange technology. Like you put this weird wallpaper on your phone, and like you can lower your gas mileage or help you with health problems. It's just weird. The thing that's so fascinating about him is he was friends with Fred Bell, and Fred Bell passed away during Jesse Ventura's conspiracy theory episode on the death ray. So he has this, he knows a lot about all this weird technology the government uses to try to mess us up with, which I don't know a lot about that stuff. But I know Andy knows a lot about it, but we're not going to talk about it.
I always just stick my finger in a light socket. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a new jacket out you can wear that drones can't see you. I forget what it's called, but we're talking about that Mossy Talk on Facebook. But this dude, Thunder White Cloud, I called him to talk to him, and he was hanging out with, I told him I think sometimes the government zaps me, meaning, they me or something, which I don't know if they do or not, but sometimes I'm pretty crazy, so I wonder. And anyway, he goes, "You said zap." And I go, "Yeah, so?" He goes, "Well, Zap is here from American Gladiator." And I was like, huh? It took me a minute to even remember what American Gladiators is. It's that show from like the 80s. And that chick Zap was there hanging out with him, and I got to talk to her. And it wasn't that very long of a conversation, but it was just peculiar that one minute I was talking to Thunder White Cloud about weird technologies and EMF frequencies, and then next thing you know, I'm talking to Zap from American Gladiator. It was just kind of peculiar, but it was cool. So that's going to be a good show. And that's it for, there's more in April. We'll get into that later. But a couple of other announcements. I'm now officially the Florida director of Joe Montaldo's International Community for Alien Research, ICAR. That's right. I'm the Florida director, and I'm also, I think, we're still working on this part of it, the media assistant. Montaldo's the main chick with that. I may be helping her out in that area because I'm known to be a great promotion prostitute when it comes to stuff. Like I was telling Andy earlier, I'm going to help him with some of his stuff. Like, for some reason, I'm a Capricorn, so when it comes to promoting stuff, I'm the dude to go to. I'm very good at whoring stuff. Not myself, though. Just important stuff. Not sex or anything, just like albums and recruiting, hoping to get some more members to ICAR through me and stuff like that. Because as you know, I write for Examiner. I write for New Dawn magazine. I have an account at beforeitsnews.com. So I'm pretty good at networking. And then the last thing before we get to our guests, which I'm very excited about, tomorrow I will be releasing an exclusive interview with David Paulides on his third book, Missing 411. Let me see, I got it right here. North America and Beyond, stories of people who have disappeared in remote locations of North America and 5 other countries. And I'll read the Whitley Strieber quote on the back, even though Whitley Strieber doesn't like me. I'll read it anyway. David Paulides has shined a light onto one of the greatest and most disturbing mysteries of our time, the simple and awful fact that people disappear, especially in our national parks, and little effort is made to find them, let alone inform the public about the danger. Even when massive searches are mounted and people are found, the events surrounding their loss and recovery are often far beyond logical explanation. This is the most comprehensive and expertly presented series of books on the subject ever written, and the latest volume, which includes stories from 5 countries, is sobering, chilling, and far too well-researched to ignore. Essential reading, Whitley Strieber, New York Times best-selling author. And you can go tomorrow to his website, canamissing.com to pick up the 3rd book. And I have an exclusive interview coming out tomorrow. I'm not allowed to release it until tomorrow with David Paulides on his 3rd book. And I pretty much asked some pretty hardcore questions about these people that are going missing, and it's a cover-up going on by the media and these national parks, and people are vanishing. And it's these books, if you haven't heard of them, Missing 411, check them out. They're terrifying, but it's true. People really are going missing, so it's not BS. All these people really are vanishing. So you can check out the interview if you're on Facebook. I would recommend joining our Church of Mabus radio show group on Facebook, or go to CHURCH-OF-MABUS-radio.com. That's CHURCH-OF-MABUS radio.com. If you look up top, it says Florida Paranormal Examiner. You can click that, and it'll be running probably around sunset when I wake up, unfortunately, with the sunset curse. Well, the sunrise curse, that is. But definitely something worth checking out, and I got an exclusive with him, so I'm looking forward to bringing out that interview tomorrow. All right. We have a great guest tonight. I've been looking forward to this guest for quite some time. Artie Six Killer Clark. Encounters with Star People. Untold Stories of American Indians. From the book is AnomousBooks.com. That's ANOMALIST books.com. And that's where you can pick up the book, and Amazon.com. But I'm telling you, this book is excellent. I've always been fascinated with shamanism and the American Indian legacy, and I collect books and documentaries on anything I can get my hands on. I have Cherokee in my blood. I'm still like a pale white dude, but I do have Cherokee in my family somehow, Irish, French, Cherokee, and alien. Don't ask me how that happened, but it did. And I just want to say that this book is excellent, and I'm very excited about this interview. So, first off, Andy, any comments before we begin?
Icar spelled backwards is racy.
Racy.
You shave your hair off, racy. Also, hot dog stands, not just national parks, but hot dog stands. Maybe places where people have either missing time or time slips.
Really?
It could be that these people are going into some vortexes or something.
That's what Alan Greenfield said. Not the crazy Art Greenfield, Alan Greenfield, the other dude. I'm not the one that thinks reptilians are eating us. The other guy, Alan Greenfield, that's you know who I'm talking about, I think. But he says that he believes they're slipping into weird dimensional, like vortexes or whatever. But it's definitely weird. I've heard rogue Bigfoots, I've heard aliens, I've heard the cartel, I've heard interdimensional vortexes, I've heard all kinds of stuff. David won't say, and in respect for the families, and drill him on it in the Interview and Examiner, and he gives us, I don't know, you'll have to read it. But anyway, I try to get some stuff out of him. But let's get to the book and Artie, because, like I said, I feel like the American Indian stance on the alien phenomenon, the star people phenomenon, is positive. I don't know if all the stories are positive, but I feel like it's not as tainted as all the other, I don't want to say all the white people stuff, but all the other stuff in ufology is just fear and, aliens are coming to get us and yada, 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 probes and yada, yada, yada. But I've interviewed Nancy Red Star and read a lot of her books, and I just love those stories and feel like they're not as tainted as much as some of the other stuff out there. So I guess, Artie, my first question is, what got you involved with this topic? I'm always curious how someone gets involved with the subject. What happened exactly?
Well, I was a new professor at Montana State, and one of my jobs was to go out onto the reservations and to recruit Native American students to come to Montana State. And at the time, I was writing grants, and I was the director of a Center for Bilingual Multicultural Education and a professor of leadership. And I was writing grants to provide scholarships for Native students to become teachers or principals and superintendents on the reservations. And so I was at a reservation site, and I had met with a number of students, and my colleague who had arranged the meeting afterwards, we went out to dinner and we discussed the students and the possibility of who I might actually be able to get to come to MSU. And after dinner, he said to me, if you have some time, let's go. I want to show you something. And so he took me up in the mountains above his village, and he parked the car, and he reached over and he got a pair of binoculars, and he said, "Come with me, it'll come," he said. And so we went out and sat on this boulder, and I said, "Well, who are we waiting for?" And he said, "Well, the Star people, the ancestors." And, I had grown up hearing stories about the Star people, and so I got on my way back to Montana, or to Bozeman, I was thinking, I wonder how many other tribes have similar stories or experiences such as this man. And so when I would travel out to recruit students, I started, or to conferences or whatever I was doing, I would ask people if I was in a casual situation, what kind of stories did they know of anyone who had stories? Had they seen UFOs? And the word just kind of got around, and they called me the UFO lady, and on the reservations, and people would just come to me and say, "I have a story," and I'd say, and it got to the point where I was even having non-Indians coming to me and saying, "I have a story. Are you collecting stories from white people?" They'd say. And I said, "I'm collecting any story," And so I'd hear these wondrous stories from people who lived on the reservations. And so that's how I got started. And I did it for over 20 years.
And this is your first book, or have you had a book before this?
Well, I when I was at the university, I was so devoted to my work that I just didn't take the time to even go beyond. This was just my own personal interest. That's how it started out. And a couple of years ago, I had been offered asked to come out of retirement. I had retired at MSU, and I'd been asked to come out of retirement and do a job for a tribe in South Dakota. And I went to Washington, D.C., and I went in through the training program for the federal government. And then the next week I had gone to the reservation and was checking out things. And I was having lunch with this group of ladies, excuse me, who said we were talking, and somehow the topic of UFOs came up. And so I began to tell them some of the stories I had heard over the years. And this one woman looked at me and she said, "And what's going to happen to all these stories when you die?" And I said, "Well, I guess they'll just go by the wayside." And she said, "Well, I think you need to write a book because this is part of our story. It's part of who we are." you have a responsibility to do this. And on my way back to Montana, I kept thinking, do I want to take this job in South Dakota, or do I want to write this book? And I decided to write the book and turn down the job in South Dakota.
Well, I'm glad you did, and that's kind of like me. I've been talking about writing a book for God over 15 years, and I do write. I write for Examiner. I have the New Dawn magazine, and I've always wrote poems and stuff like that, but for some reason I've had this block or this hurdle when it comes to a book, and that's my next phase, is the book. And this book of yours is just, I love it. And any future volumes I want to be involved in, and interview you on Examiner and on the show, and I just like it because it's untold stories, of American Indians that haven't been told before.
Well, I'm also working on the second one, and this one is stories I collected in Central America and Mexico. And I heard Andy say that he was interested in stories of Bigfoot, and I've certainly got some interesting ones down in Guatemala.
Cool. Well, I'll have to get a hold of you about that and let Andy too, because I'm involved with Andy with something he's writing up on Bigfoot heavily too, some interviews me and him did, so we'll have to get in touch with you and see what we can dance around with that too as well. I'll make sure to give Andy your email, because that would be excellent.
Yeah.
And that's also the stage I'm at right now. A lot of people are using my interviews for their books, which is kind of cool. It's like a lot of my interviews, people are asking to use them in books, which is like cool, but I want to do my own book. That's the next phase, but it's still cool to be in a book. So I'm like, that's the phase I'm into, where people are using my stuff for books, so I love that. But yeah, we'll have to get a hold of you about the Bigfoot stories and get permission from you to use those, and of course plug you and all that good stuff, your links, and it'll be more a way to get more, your name out there more as well. I guess my first question, well, not my first, it's like my second or third, are most of these stories that you're getting from the American Indians, do you find that most of them are positive? Are there any evil ones, or are they mostly positive?
What I basically have dealt with has been interviewing indigenous people throughout the world. I started out with American Indians, and for the Native Americans of America, you find that of the United States, the majority of them are quite positive experiences. I find that especially among the people who are, say, 30 and over. I did find a few cases of anxiety and fear among younger people, and I'm not sure whether you have the breakdown of communication between the elders and the old, where the young people aren't hearing the old stories that the elders often tell. But I found a lot of anxiety and fear among groups of women, particularly in Mexico. But this book doesn't deal with that. But as far as this book, you find most of them were positive experiences, and all of the ones I interviewed were that way.
All right. Well, I guess what I want you to do is, if you could tell us one of the stories, and then I'll hand it over to Andy to ask you a few questions. What's a story that you'd like to share with us from your book?
Well, my favorite story from the book, I think, is an elder I met by the name of Leland. And Leland lived in a very remote section of the reservation. He lived alone. He had served in World War I and had learned English once he had gone there. World War II. And he had learned English once he had gone to the military, because he had never learned English before. And he said he picked up phrases from the radio and learned it once he was in the military. He was, I had gone to visit Leland because I had promised someone on faculty at the university that I would pick up a drum they had ordered from him. Apparently he was quite well known as a maker of traditional drums. So I had agreed to go see him. Well, when I went to visit with him, I had taken food, which is a normal way of what I always think is the proper way to approach an elder on the reservation, and I went to visit him, and he as time went on and we were talking, and we were drinking coffee, and he started to tell me that there were many strange things that happened out here where it was so isolated, because I asked him why he stayed out in the middle of nowhere with no one around, and he said, well, he liked it there, and this is where he was born, and this was his father's land, and then he mentioned that there were things that happened out here that no one would believe. And I said, well, try me, I'm open to anything. And he said, well, he began to tell me the story about a spacecraft that would come, hover over his land, and that it would lower an automobile onto the ground, loaded with individuals, and the automobile would hit his property, and it would go away in the dark of night and return the next day with only the driver. The UFO would reappear, take the vehicle, and then a week later the same thing might occur, or 2 weeks later, or a month later. And he said, walk with me and let me show you something. And he took me out into the middle of his field where there was a brown spot. And he said, nothing grows there, because that's where they hover. And he said, you see those car tracks? Those are the car tracks they have made through my land, and I have no automobile. He said, and no one comes here. And then he told me about a night that they came, and they had a flat tire. And they didn't know what to do, apparently. And so the driver had come to his little cabin and was standing outside the door. And he said he stood there for several minutes, and he said, I have my lights off, and I'm watching him, and he's just standing there. And he said, I opened the door, and it's obvious he wants me to follow him, and I go out there, and here's this flat tire. So I indicate that everybody has to get out of the car so I can repair it. And I find this tire, I prop the car up, and I change the tire. And he talks about how strange the individuals inside the automobile behaved. He said the women acted like they didn't know how to walk in shoes, and that they huddled together, and he couldn't see them. He couldn't make them out in the darkness very well. When I asked him to describe him, he said that the driver wore a hat and that he looked like he had no neck. But when he finished the job and they climbed back in the car, the driver gave him 10 silver dollars. And so I said to him, do you still have those 10 silver dollars? And he reached in his pocket and he pulled out one, and he said, this is my lucky silver dollar, but all the others I took to town, and I sold them. And the guy told me if I got any more, to be sure to bring them. But he says, I've been waiting, but I haven't had a chance to get any more. And when Leland every time, his story was corroborated by one of his friends. One day I went there, and he had a friend that was staying with him because he had gotten ill, and the friend said, yes, what he's telling you is exactly right. They sat around and speculated about what might be their agenda. They were convinced that aliens were coming to America and infiltrating into the population. I asked him, I said, well, where do you think he takes them? And he said, well, they take him off the reservation. obviously, because everybody knows everybody here. So if they had stayed around the reservation, we would have been suspicious of strangers. And so he said, I think they take them to airports and take them to bus terminals and places, and they just disappear into the population. So I thought that was an interesting concept.
Definitely peculiar. Andy, you got some questions?
When I was just listening to that story, it's somewhat similar. Well, I heard that same exact story, but I think it came, I'm trying to remember where I read that. John Keel, maybe, Gray Barker. That's not the only time, a UFO has dropped off cars with guys in them.
The interesting thing about this is that, this elder did not have television. He did not have a telephone. He had no knowledge of any of these kind of sources, that you're talking about. I've never read John Keel, but I'm familiar with the name because I see it occasionally. But I don't think his story was influenced by any other writer.
Oh yeah, well I believe it. I believe that it wasn't. I'm not sure. It's hard to interpret. Knowing what I know now about what possible real craft they had, early drone craft. It could have been actual guys with an actual craft who were part of the conspiracy group that was building the saucers. And what my story is about, and I think to some degree Mothman, is that they may have been building these things where I lived. So I keep running across similar stories and evidence that was what was happening. It doesn't mean that there isn't a supernatural phenomenon. It's just that they piggybacked on the legends or the actual supernatural phenomenon, because I do believe you can experience those same kinds of things in a altered dimension or state or in an ET-like realm. For instance, when I was a kid, I was always sleepwalking, and they would find me outside. I wouldn't know what was going on, but in my head, in my own subjective experience of those states, I have memories of going outside and understanding and being awake enough to remember what I was seeing. So you can say it, but I'm not so sure, because some of the things that I saw were like what you're talking about. These different, I had interactions with Bigfoot and Men in Black. I saw a floating car. So, it's possible that they had I know the Navy had these little skimmers that could fly above the ocean. They were like two men things. They were about the size of a car, and they could have built one that looked like a car, and they could probably, could have flown it around. I don't know if what I was seeing was interdimensional or real people, because there's so much evidence in my neighborhood that there were real guys who were doing spy work and stuff, and the Atomic Energy Commission was probably involved in the building of these crafts, some of which may have been nuclear. And so they often have lands. The AEC has different bases on lands that are close to Indian reservations, so I could see where they might end up doing things, on the reservation because of the proximity. But the question I wanted to ask was, I noticed earlier work was about abuse on the reservation, and I'm wondering if you found a link between the stress of difficult life, difficult childhoods, trauma, linking to these paranormal incidents, because I know that George Hansen, who was a researcher, he is a researcher in the lab doing ESP experiments. There's definitely a statistical correlation that's provable between stress and paranormal events. So I'm wondering if you found any of that as you were going around, a link between those.
Not at all. In fact, I think the majority of the people that I interviewed, came from families where I would say that was probably the least problem in their family life. They were from really strong families, the majority of them, because the circles that I traveled in were circles where people were well educated. Their friends and relatives and people they knew were in similar circumstances, and abuse had not been a history, or alcoholism either. In fact, I only had one case where one of the people that in the book had been involved, had been an alcoholic, had a history of alcoholism. And other than that, there were none of those kinds of incidences in their lives, because I did ask that question. I was very interested in that because I've read some of that literature where people who are skeptical of encounters and UFO experiences of the population that they're simply acting out certain things from childhood and trying to make sense out of things. And if you can make yourself believe that it's a paranormal experience, so it was an alien or somebody else doing these things to you, if your father is using you and you can pretend that it was an alien with, slanted eyes, it's much easier to get through it than it is perhaps to recognize it was your own dad. So I'm aware of that research, so I ask those questions. Now, I don't discuss that in the book, but because I didn't want to go into those kind of things. I think there's enough negative things talked about with Native American people as far as abuse and alcoholism and dysfunctional families. And I just wanted to tell the stories of the people. When you talk about I was in a small village in Alaska, and a woman came up to me, and she was a secretary. And she said, I know that you're collecting stories. I heard that you were collecting stories about Native Americans and or Alaska Natives with their experiences with UFOs and aliens. But she said, I have a story that I want to tell you. Now, the story is not in the book because, of course, she's not Native, but she told me a story about being with a girlfriend, and they had gone shopping into this larger city to go shopping, and they were on their way back home, and it had gotten dark. But as they came around this very sharp turn in the road, they saw an automobile suspended inside the cliff on the left side of the highway. And hovering over it was a UFO. And she said, we were just appalled, in awe, every emotion you can imagine. And she said, we drove to the nearest place that we could get off the road and turn around and go back. And when we went back, the car was gone. And she said, I swear to you, that car was half inside that mountain and half outside. And she said, we always talked among ourselves and believed that UFO was trying to put that car down and it made a mistake and put it inside that mountain. But half of it was sticking out. And she said, I swear to you, and I'm a Christian woman, that what I'm telling you is the truth. So it was an interesting story.
Did you find any links between Bigfoot and UFOs?
I didn't talk to anyone who told me about Bigfoot stories. None.
Okay. But you did, but when
in
you
Mexico, but not in the United States.
Down in Mexico, what kind of can you give us like a taste of what you found down there with the Bigfoot?
Well, there's a story that's told down in Guatemala about these giants that used to walk the earth in Guatemala, and they had white jaguars as their pets, and they would wring off the heads of men and spit them out like watermelon seeds, they would say. And any man that was caught by these giants would suffer the curse of roaming the earth for. So I was talking to an elder about this. I asked him, I said, and this man told me, he was a driver for me. He says, and these giants are still in these jungles, he said. So I was talking to an elder, and I repeated this story. And I asked him, I said, what can you tell me? And he begins to tell me that there are these hairy giants that live in the jungles, and that they live on the mountaintops, he says, and they have long hair, and but they have a face of a man, and the only time they come into the villages is when they steal the women, and they take our women, and they have children by our women, and he says, but there are other giants too. And I said, well, what kind of giants? And he said, well, these are the ones who come from the sky. And he says, but I think that the ones that come from the sky control the hair. And so he says, every time they come from the sky, we hear the hairy ones crying, and their voices are throughout the jungles, and everyone hides inside until the ones from the sky go away. And we think that the ones from the sky brought them here, and they come back to check on them. So that's the gist of the story, he told me, but you'll have to wait until you read the book, until you hear the full story.
Do we need to take a break, Jeff?
Joe hasn't said anything yet, but soon probably.
Because what she just said reminded me of one of my sleepwalking incidents, which I talked about, and a long series of dreams I had about a white Bigfoot that would appear in that window where my sister took that picture of whatever, it might be Mothman, we're not sure. And in conjunction with that white Bigfoot, they would glow. I mean, there was a whole family of them, it seemed like. And they would talk to you telepathically, when you sleep, when you're in that state.
Yeah.
But there was a Black Panther that was around that several people saw or claimed to see. And that was right at the same time. So it's almost like the two things were there on Woodward Drive, but the Bigfoot was white and the Panther was black.
Uh-huh.
Well, the jaguar, this is an old legend that's told in Guatemala. This isn't what the modern day elder was telling me. I had been told this story by my driver, and he told me that these giants still live out here, he said. So when I asked the old man about these giants that were supposed to live in the jungle and with the white jaguars, and he said, no, that isn't the giant who lives here. And then he began to tell me about this hairy monster with the face of a man that stole their women. And then the giants that come from the sky, that he believed planted them there. And of course, if you've ever traveled through the mountains of Guatemala, you know what that area looks like. I mean, there'd be no way. I mean, you could disappear in there 20 feet off the highway and never find your way out,
Yeah. Yeah, West Virginia's like that too, very dense. You can't just, just can't traverse those mountains very easily on foot. It would be very difficult.
Yeah.
They're very steep.
So Artie, your website's sixkiller.com?
Right.
And anonymousbooks.com is the publisher.
Right.
We're about to take a break for about 8 to 10 minutes, and we'll be back with the rest of the show. And I think we got like 2 minutes or so. Just real quick, I'm curious, what does Six Killer mean? Because I'm thinking of tribes in the olden days scalping white people.
I'm just a translation, English translation of a family name.
Okay.
Are you related to Sonny? Are you related to Sonny Six Killer?
I suspect he's a cousin.
Yeah, I used to play basketball with him.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm from the North Carolina area, and he is from the Oklahoma. So I'm not sure. But I'm also Choctaw. So I'm a mixture, Choctaw, Cherokee, and of course white, German white.
Interesting. All right, well, we're going to go on break now, and everybody, you're listening to UFO Paranormal Radio Network, and also make sure you stop by www.icar1.com. That's icar.1. I'm messing that up. www.icar1.com to check out the International Community for Alien Research, which I am now the Florida director. So check that out. We'll be back in 8 to 10 minutes with Artie Six Killer Clark, Encounters with Star People, Untold Stories of American Indians, and we have Andy Colvin, Mothman photographer, with us. So we'll be back shortly. Thanks for listening.
To news, Joe Montaldo and Stephanie Benetti. Join us each Saturday, 8 p.m. Central, to hear the latest news on current events. Expect the unexpected as our hosts offer their opinion on some of the most controversial topics of the day. News on the Flip Side, only on UPRN 107.9 New Orleans.
Hello, everyone. Trish Sheridan, host of A Global Focus. Come join us each Friday evening at A Global Focus's new time, 9 to 11 p.m. Eastern. Come join the discussion.
Light up your night with The Kevin Smith Show. Hi, this is Kevin Smith. Join me Monday through Friday right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Hey, hi there. Got your attention? I'm Gia Scott, and I was curious what you were doing from 7 to 9 p.m. Central Time on Tuesdays. See, I host this really interesting little radio program that airs live then, and we bring in all sorts of guests. Authors, experiencers, and everything in between. It's paranormal and guaranteed to make you go, My guest list is always up at www.giascott.com, and do tune in to the Dawn of Shades from 7 to 9 p.m. on Tuesdays.
If you are listening to the show and wish to join us in the chat room, visit paltalk.com. Go to the social issues, select other, and enter the UFO Paranormal Radio Network.
Breaking news. Strange black pyramid UFO ships over every major city on the Earth. People are exhilarated and scared. Reptilian strange creatures are beaming down. My God, they're beaming me up with them. Don't put that probe there. Don't put that probe there. Don't put a... Ooh. Listen to the Church-of-MABUS radio show at 11 p.m. Eastern, Saturday nights with host Jeffrey Pritchett, bringing you the high strange. Visit www.churchofmabusradio.com. That's www.churchofmabusradio.com. radio.com.
Hey everybody, this is Jill Marie Morris from Perspective X. If you've been searching Pity Talk radio show with an edge, then look no further. Join my co-host Stephanie Benetti and I as we get down and dirty discussing the latest hot topics and relevant newsworthy stories. Informative, engaging, and quite often controversial, Perspective X is a unique blend of insight, opinion, and wit. So tune in and listen every Wednesday night at 10 p.m. on UPRN 107.9 FM New Orleans. It's not just an opinion, it's our perspective. Perspective X.
Tune in to the Mind Cemetery with your hosts Chip and Nicole every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern.
Exclusively on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. We delve into UFOs, abductions, ghosts, aliens, conspiracies, and cryptozoology.
And how could you ever forget about those creepy topics you won't hear on your local news?
This is where I would insert my obligatory skeptical statement. The Mind Cemetery, where the paranoia about the paranormal comes to rest.
Follow us on Twitter and subscribe to us on Facebook. Also check us out on our website, mindcemetery.com, for show updates and the Critically Mind Cemetery blog.
It's not critically acclaimed, but you should check it out anyway, mindcemetery.com.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Benetti, and along with Joe Montaldo, we co-host a new show called News on the Flip Side. You can catch us every Saturday night, 8 p.m. Central, where we will be discussing current events and topics going on in the world today. We have opinions on everything. There's no topic that we won't discuss, and we'll go places that other shows wouldn't dare. False history gets made all day, every day. The truth of the new is never on the news, but you can catch it here, News on the Flip Side, only on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network.
You are listening to UPRN 107.9 New Orleans.
Tune in to UFO Undercover, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, with your host, Joe Montaldo, right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, the world needs to hear the truth. In that seemed like it was short. Can everybody hear me in the chat room? Can you hear me in the chat room, everybody? Turn the volume up.
Yes, they can. All righty, we're back. Welcome to the Church-of-MABUS radio show. Just real quick, in April, we got Thunder White Cloud, like I said. Ken Gerhard, he's coming on. A guy named Blaze, a friend of mine, is going to help co-host that. That'll be his first time co-hosting. He's in a band. He's a really cool dude, a friend of mine. He's going to help co-host. He does all these bands in Texas and El Paso and, Austin and stuff. And he's going to help co-host that show. And then Kevin Randall, Andy's military friend, coming on the 20th. And then Jamie Avalos on Bigfoot. And then real quick for May, Dr. Rita Lewis, Stacy Brown, Sasquatch Hunters, Ken Bakeman on Reptilians, and then Nick Redfern. Then you got and Andy, how do you feel about Peter Lavenda?
He's dug up some interesting material over the years.
I have him coming in the summer, so I'll see if you want to co-host. He's coming in June.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I've been wanting to get him for a while. So June, some Peter Lavenda. He's got a weird book coming out about H.P. Lovecraft. And there's some weird rumor that he wrote that Simon Necronomicon. I don't know if it's true or not. Like something to do with that book. I don't know I know H.P. Lovecraft had something to do with it, but there was some rumor that he put it together and he's Simon, the publisher of it or something. But he wrote some book called The Dark Lord, and it's got this weird H.P. Lovecraft stuff. So hopefully that pans out, because I've been wanting to interview him for a pretty long time. But all right. Let's get back to the show at hand. We're with RD6 Killer Clark. Encounters with Star People, Untold Stories of American Indians. And let me look through my keywords here. I'm trying to find a good story here. What about let me see, spacing out. I always do that. The military veterans, is that who you talked about a minute ago, or is that another story?
No. Are you talking about the three military men that saw the spacecraft over their military base, over their Air Force base?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, and one of them was, from Montana, and he was in my office one day, and he made a comment about a poster I had, and he said that I had that poster that was on the X-Files, I Want to Believe, with a spacecraft on my wall, and he said that he was staring at that poster, and he said, that looks exactly like the craft that I saw back years ago. And he began to tell me the story about this spacecraft that came and hovered over their military base, and they were all on alert. And he said that there were three of them that were Indians that were stationed together at that base, and they were best of friends, of course, and they were from different tribes around the country, and they saw one of the airmen just went crazy and started shooting at this craft, and he was stunned apparently by the craft, and then he apparently was put into the hospital there, and the next day all of them were called together, and they were told that it was a military exercise, what they saw, that it was all planned, and then they were all given orders to go to other bases, and within 24 hours they were all separated and gone. And he said, we were just kids. He said 18, 19 years old. We all had dreams flying airplanes, and so we joined the Air Force, and he said the closest we got was, the repair shop. We worked as mechanics. And I said, well, who are the others? As he told me the story, and after he finished, I said, well, can the names of the other men that were with you? And he said, I can, and he said, I have their addresses of where they were from at the time, but he said, I have had no contact with them whatsoever. And he said, but the next time you're over my way or I'm back in Bozeman, he said, I'll give you the names and addresses. And so he did, and that summer I went looking for them and found them. And even though they hadn't been together for, two or more decades, they told me the very identical story. And one of them had actually re-enlisted and had found out that the young man that had been stunned had died, and he had run across somebody that had been in the hospital, was an orderly or a worker in the hospital, been assigned to the hospital, and that the young man had died that had shot at the craft, and but the military had just told him that it was just one of their maneuvers that they had, and he said it wasn't. I know it wasn't.
Strange. Well, that's kind of, when it comes to, I guess, Andy and me, like I've seen UFOs before in my younger years, and I've even seen some very peculiar beings. Some of them were made out of pure light energy. Others were very serpentine, reptilian-like. Some others were very small and cloaked, standing around a black box. And during that time, I had an experience where some kind of government agency sent out a helicopter to chase the UFO away. And there was at one point a craft over my home in Georgia that made no sound, and it was like a helicopter that made no noise. It was hovering over my home, and a man in a military uniform waved at me, and he had like a weird helmet on, and it shot up in the air. It was almost like he was mocking me. But when it comes to UFOs and stuff, Andy can talk about this too, of course, and Andy's helped me to kind of convince me of this perspective as well. We both believe that there's, alien experiences with multidimensional realms and things like that, but we also believe that, there's the government, and they have been messing around with UFO technology since possibly after World War II, and that they've used this technology on civilians and on people and messed with them on some level, and it's led up to drones and things of that nature. So that's kind of my problem with ufology right now, is you differentiating and discernment between what's a drone and what's a UFO and what's, the government and what's really aliens. And it's when you tell that story, it's kind of like, is that the government messing with somebody and just using them as a guinea pig, or is it really an alien? It's so hard to tell.
Well, my question to you would be, what would be the purpose of the government doing that? I mean, the people that I interviewed were not dreaming. They were not under hypnosis. They were recalling stories, fully awake, and without the aid of hypnosis or anything else. They were not near, in this case, obviously they were stationed on a military base, but what would be the reason for the government to try to influence Native American people who live in remote locations for most part, to influence them to think that they're UFOs? I mean, I really question that kind of a theory. I don't doubt that the United States government isn't dealing with a lot of different technology that we know nothing about, and probably are getting it either from alien worlds or from stealing it from some place. But I just don't believe that that the government is out there trying to convince American Indians that UFOs are visiting them. I don't see any purpose in that.
I'll say one thing about that, and then I'll let Andy answer because he probably can better than me. But my answer would be because they're asshats.
Because what?
Because they're asshats, assholes.
Well, the other thing is, if the government is in that business, perhaps they're just preparing us for admitting that there are other entities and beings on other planets.
Well, what
maybe
do you
they're
think,
just preparing us.
What do you think?
There's a lot of discussion about why is the government serving as advisors on movies like Independence Day and all these different kinds of sci-fi movies. Why are they so much involved in that? Is there speculation that they're just preparing the public for what they've been lying about for the past century?
I hope that's what it is. I hope that's what it is. But what do you think, Andy?
Well, the biggest propagators of the ET view are always government people. I mean, that's pretty consistent and has been from the early days. I think the early days are different than the later days. What was going on in the 40s and 50s is different than what was going on in the 90s. In the earlier days, the men in black are not only propagating the idea of spacemen, but they also were intimidating people who had seen certain craft. Now, they probably wouldn't intimidate somebody who saw a natural UFO, a light in the forest, but they would hassle someone who may have seen an experimental craft. So that knowledge remains secret because they knew they had to develop these and would take a long time to get from what they got from the Nazis to get to what we have today. In the early days, the Nazis, the scientists who knew how to do this, didn't just come to the United States, but they also went to Britain, Russia, South America. So this was spread out. This technology, the knowledge of it was spread out, and after the war, the Nazis kind of kept they didn't ever really surrender. And they kind of kept their system together. They used all the money they had taken. They invested in corporations, and so they already had power even then. Even though they'd been defeated, they had already started that transfer process in 42, 43, and a lot of that money went into pharmaceuticals and this and that. But they really had a hold on the technology of Tesla and death rays, rays that would kill people. They had that. I've seen diagrams of what they had. You can find the diagrams of the craft. There's a witness testimony, guys that worked on the projects. But what happened was they were autonomous after the war to some degree. So they could fly around and mess with our military bases. And I think they did. But I think they had secret agreements with people in the CIA because the CIA is pretty much the one that brought them in. But the Navy was probably the agency that was building, that really kicked in and really started building newer models. And it wasn't until the late 50s that they had gotten a hold of the actual patents for these things, because they have to follow the paper trail. You just can't take somebody's design and start building it. So they sequestered these scientists and they pressured them until they signed over the rights, and that took about 10 years after the war. So then they started building these. And so then the UFOs became more of our own. Whatever real craft are out there were, by the time of the mid-60s, I think those were no longer Nazi craft that were considered a threat by the military because, hey, somebody in the military was working with the Nazis, but a lot of them weren't. The majority of the people weren't working with the Nazis and didn't have any idea what was going on. And maybe they took out people. Maybe they shot people with beams, because we had that in my town. We had some stories I heard from several people of people getting, it looks like they got shot with lasers. And I think you told in your story there that happened on that military base. So I think, the ET thesis does cover up. It kept it hidden for a long time, but it's a good way to keep people looking up in the sky instead of, over at the military base or whatever. The MIB were definitely going after, were not going after ET believer or researchers. They were going after people that believed that these were secret government craft.
Well, I believe American Indians have had contact with star people like before our government was even a fart in the wind, like back in the day before, I don't know what year, but I believe that, American Indians have had contact with the star people for centuries and centuries before we probably even had a government, possibly. I mean, from Nancy Red Star's stories from different shamans and medicine men and their interactions with the star people. But like I said, I also think that our government, got a hold of weird UFO stuff from Hitler, and that's been proven. And they've also, people and done experiments, be it psychological or whatever. But that's the thing that's so, frustrating with ufology is just you got to have discernment and figure out what's what, and it's hard to do. But I definitely believe that, people are having alien experiences, but I believe also that there are weird government things going on. But one thing I want to do, I want to get back to the book. There's a very interesting chapter already called "They Are Shapeshifters" about Grandma Redbird. Could you tell us that story? That's very peculiar.
Oh, which story was that?
It's Grandma Redbird. It starts off talking about cultures that feature monsters and supernatural entities as evil like vampires and werewolves and shapeshifters. And her story is she had contact. I'm skimming it. She was 70 years old. Grandma Redbird was referring to her. It's chapter 19. And it's titled blah. They are shapeshifters. Skimming it. Let me see. I know Grandma Redbird had experiences. I guess the aliens were shapeshifters on some level.
Well, she said she had been seeing these crafts since she was a child. She said she used to get in trouble when she was a little girl because she used to stay up late and watch the skies, and her mother would make her come into the house, and she would sneak out because she didn't want to miss them. And she said that she had never feared the space travelers, she said, until just a few weeks before I arrived, and she said there was a different group that was coming. And it wasn't the ones that she was familiar with. And she said that this group frightened her, but she never could really tell me why she was frightened, other than that she had missed time, and that she felt that she had been taken by them, and she said that she went aboard their craft, and that she said she had no memory of how she got there, but she knew she was there. And she said there was a doctor that was examining her, and I asked her, I said, well, can you describe the doctor? And she said, well, he was a very strange-looking fellow with a black glittery suit, she said. And she said that it was very black against his skin, and it came all the way down to his hands that were very large, long fingers, twice as long as mine, she said. And they were, she said they were long, skinny fingers. She kept talking about his fingers, and she said they were not normal, and his shoulders were broad, but his legs were long and skinny, and they looked funny, she said, inside this black glittery suit. And so I said, well, what about her face? And she said, well, I can't describe him because all I could see in his face was my reflection. So, you know, it appeared like the alien was wearing something that prevented her from looking at him. But she said he kept asking her how old she was in Earth years, and she was very confused by him asking in Earth years. She said she didn't understand Earth years. She only knew years, and he kept saying, why had she lived so long? And when I told him that I had no control over how long I lived, and she said he seemed very confused by that. But I had other elders tell me that when they had been taken aboard craft, that they really had no interest in them because of their age. That they were liked to take younger people. That when people were older, they had no use for them. And I had a similar experience told to me by a grandmother and a granddaughter in Mexico who told me that they didn't want the grandmother because she was no longer of childbearing years, but they wanted the granddaughter. So I thought that was kind of an interesting idea that they revealed to me, that the grandmother was too old, but not the granddaughter. And here is this lady saying that they were obsessed with her age, her Earth years, and she didn't quite understand, you know, what they meant by Earth years. And of course, English was not her first language. She was, you know, a native speaker and had been speaking her native language almost exclusively in her home.
They want them for breeding. It goes back to the whole Bible thing. Angels shagging chicks and making Nephilim mutant babies.
Yeah, and she considered them. She said that they were capable of disguising themselves in different ways. So that's why she called them shapeshifters. You know, their crafts would appear one way and then another way to her, and they upset her very much. They weren't like the ones that had come to her and exchanged different knowledge about medicines and things. So she was very upset with them.
What about the story entitled "The Man Who Shot an Alien," Chapter 4?
Well, one of my favorite people in the world, Chauncey. His granddaughter had come into my office one day, and she said to me, she says, "You know, my granddad is known as the man who shot an alien." And I said, "Oh, really?" And she said, "Yeah." She said, "You ought to talk to him sometime." So I had been on her reservation a few months later, and I made a point of staying over the weekend because I wanted to find her grandfather and go talk to him. And I asked her, I said, "Well, what are the favorite things he likes?" And she gave me a list of, you know, he liked this brand of cigarettes, and he liked this kind of candy, and all the things that, you know, he liked. And I went to the grocery store and took them out to his house. And when I pulled up in the yard, he said, "You must be that university woman." And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, he invited. And I said, "Well, I understand that you're known as the man who shot an alien." And he laughed, and he said, "Well, only among my kids," he says, "only among my grandkids." But he said, "I better tell you the truth. I really didn't shoot him. I just shot at him." And then he begins to tell me the story about one night being alone in his cabin, and all of his kids were grown and gone, and his wife had passed on, and he had this dog that he called Blue Sun, and he considered this dog his child. And he said, "I was alone with Blue Sun, and all of a sudden he started to bark. And so I let him out the door. And then I grabbed my shotgun. I'm following him and he's gone. He just disappeared. So I went around the back of the cabin, and that's when I saw Blue Sun on the ground, and this figure was over him. And I thought he was hurting my dog, so I shot in the air to scare him. And I said, well, what did he look like? And he said, well, he looked like he was wearing children's pajamas, but he was the funniest looking being. He said he glowed, and he almost like you could see through him, he said. And anyway, he proceeds to tell me that he couldn't tell whether this being was talking to him or if he heard the words or not. I asked him that. But anyway, apparently this being told him that he came just to explore, and that there was another ship in the sky. He was just in a small craft. So he walked with this being to where the craft was parked behind a butte on his property. And along the way, he was talking to his dog, and he was giving his dog orders. This alien became very interested. And when they get to this little spacecraft, and he said it could have held no more than 1 or 2 people, he said the alien wanted to take his dog. And he said, I just put my shotgun across my arms, and I stood there. And he said he got the message. But he said he keeps coming back. And he comes, and he's just waiting. And when he comes, he says, Blue Sun gets very frightened, and he goes under the bed. And he says, they're just waiting for me to die. And so a couple of years later, he did die. And I went to his funeral, and they buried him out on his plot of land where his family was buried, where his children who had died before him and his wife, and they covered up his grave before I left, and the dog was lying on this grave. And I went out back, and I knelt down, and I held this dog, and you could almost feel the grieving coming from him. And so I went to his granddaughter, and I said, I told her how much her grandfather had meant to me in the time that I had known him. And I said, but what's going to happen to Blue Sun? And she said, well, I said, I'm very worried about him. I said, I'd be willing to take him home with me. And she said, no, she said, just give him time to grieve. She said, I'm coming back out tomorrow, and my kids really love that dog. And she said, oh, we'll take him home with us. So all the way home, I'm thinking about my little dog and about this dog, and feeling really sad. And when I was probably another few weeks before I get back to the reservation. It was right before Christmas. And I see her standing out in a schoolyard, and she was supervising recess. And I walk over, and we start talking, and I said, well, what happened to Blue Sun? And she said, it was the strangest thing. She said, we went back the next morning, and he was gone. And we looked, and we looked, and we looked, and we couldn't find him. She said, I think he just wandered off and died. And I just couldn't get it out of my mind, because I figured that Chauncey was right. They came back for him, and they got him at last.
That's strange. I'd be pretty pissed if aliens try to take my dog.
Well, me too.
Yeah.
It was kind of interesting, because remember the story in the book of the girl that the alien came to her and asked her about a horse?
What was that story again? I remember.
Remember, she lived out on the ranch, and she had horses. She was quite a horsewoman. In fact, she had won a scholarship, to. She was a rodeo girl, and she said this. She had seen these crafts several times, and one night she was waiting out on the porch, and she said she saw these craft, and there were balls of light that came, and she said there were several of them, and when one broke away from the other and came near the house, and she said, I'm sitting there trying to determine how quickly it will be, how quickly I can get to my vehicle, to my truck. And she said it materialized into a man, a being that looked like a human. And he told her that not to be afraid, that he knew that she had horses. And he asked her what you should do if a horse got sick. And he said that they had horses, and they didn't know what to do for them. And so she went through this whole thing with him, and she said that she never looked at the world the same after that incident happened, because she said, I think they're stealing horses. So that was a different kind of story that I had never heard before.
Yeah, that's definitely strange. And
I've heard of, or was it the first, one of the first mutilated animals that was found that I think Hal tied to UFOs wasn't that a horse?
Yeah. You have some mutilation stories in here, don't you? Or something about some mutilations?
Yes. Yes. And but those were cows. And they happened with a couple, and even missing time. And when he was a police officer and she was a teacher. When they came back, when all of a sudden they see a spacecraft, and then when they are suddenly driving to on their way to Billings, and they notice that the mutilated animals that were along the side of the road are gone, and then they realize that they've lost 3 hours of time.
Yeah, that's bizarre. So, Andy, any comments?
Well, I can relate to that ball of light turning into a being, because we had this special place where everybody saw different things on our road, and I saw something that appeared to be materializing out of a tree. It's the only time in my waking moments where I can clearly say I saw something like that. And 3 other people saw Mothman at that same spot. And then there was a lady that lived right there who was always talking about the balls of light that would come around, and she claimed they would talk to her and stuff. And so I can easily see where the being that I saw, that it appeared to be coming out of a tree. But there's lots of legends about spirits in trees, and I somehow, the magnetism was right, the stars are right, and I saw in a window into some other dimension that was overlaying, the one that was there. But I've never forgotten that being, and it was all black. It was very thin, almost double jointed, and it did seem to be sending out thoughts to me, like it was trying to communicate. And
there are even some very old stories and legends about balls of light that turn into people among different tribes.
Yeah.
But these are traditional stories, that have been handed down for generations.
Yeah, this is a very old Indian crossroads. There's probably an Indian community was right there where that happened, because there was the very first school, probably in West Virginia, was right there at that very spot that had burned down years before. So all these weird UFOs, Mothman, Black Panthers, all like we're all seeing where this school burned down and killed a couple of kids. So you can speculate about, what's going on there. But there's no doubt that several people saw a variety of things, including something that looked like the Virgin Mary. So you've got dark entities, light entities. There's definitely a shape-shifting thing present at some locations for whatever reason.
Well, there are stories that come out of West Virginia, too. You were talking, Jeffrey, about one of your guests that's coming on that talks about disappearing people. I mean, I'm familiar with 2 or 3 stories that came out of West Virginia of entire families that disappeared, and even seeing one time when I was a child driving through West Virginia and seeing this huge billboard with all of these children and their parents' pictures on it, and the house had burned down, but there were no bodies found in the wreckage, and this family was never found again.
Yeah, I remember that story. I just ran across that not too long ago.
And I remember it as a child, driving through West Virginia, and a huge billboard, with all their pictures. And it was just, it was something that stuck in my mind from the time I was a kid. It just worried me to death, thinking about these children that had been lost. And where were they? And where did they go? And of course, there's a story in my book about a family that disappears, and the elders just believe it was the SAR people who came and took them away.
That's definitely a trip out. I know those missing 411 books. There's 3 of them, and they're just filled with weird stories like that. People just vanishing into the ethers of nowhere. And the national parks are covering it up. And it's just
well, in this family on the reservation, they said that, they went to their house and the food was on the table. Everything was, they had sat down to eat, and then they were gone. And the interesting thing about it, a few years later, the man who was the elder who was telling me the story is telling me how this craft came back and was, he found he had been down on the river when he saw the craft, and he got back to his house, and there were 2 entities in his house searching his house. And he said that he thought what had happened is they had mistaken his house for this house where these people no longer lived, because he said that their house was gone because it had been covered by a reservoir that had been built. And he said that they had thought that his house, he believed, was the house of the family they had taken.
Just bizarre. Yeah, the stories in David Paulides' books, they're terrifying. I have trails all around my house, and I get the creeps just walking around little trails around my house now after reading those books. Just the thought that you could be going for a stroll and suddenly you're gone, and nobody knows what's doing it. And he said he wanted to have a meeting with all the families and talk about it privately. He's real keen on not discussing what he thinks it is because he doesn't want to scare the families, but so at some point he wants to have a meeting with them all and then do it privately because it's something weird. I mean,
well, the elder in my story who told me about the missing families believed, as the people believed, that the SAR people had come and taken them, and apparently it's something that they felt had happened before, that it had been going on for a very long time, that sometimes you could be chosen to go live.
Well, that wouldn't be so bad now. It's just freaking your family out, They wouldn't know where you're at. They wouldn't worry about, And if I couldn't take my dog Jack next to me, it ain't going to happen.
Sometimes you might not have a choice. Or you could be like Chauncey, just put your shotgun across your arms and scare them away.
Yeah, definitely. No, Jack's going to have to go. Just leave me. He's a Jack Russell Terrier mix with a beagle, and he smiles all the time, and I don't know, he'd have to go. He'd have to do the Close Encounters trip with me for sure. No doubt about it. So,
well, you know, and when I did my interviews, I interviewed over 900 people. I have over 900 stories in my files. I tried to choose the ones that were not only, you know, would be of high interest, I felt, to people who have an interest in this area, but also that were representatives of different types of encounters. So I tried to offer a variety. So, you know, we just barely touched on what the book is about, and I want your audience to know that.
Definitely. The book is filled with a whole bunch of other stories, and by anomalous books. That's ANOMALIST books.com, and it's just excellent. I can't wait for the other one. When can we expect the other books to come out? The other
well,
books?
I'm not sure. I'm about halfway through. I'm working on it. So
process. At least you started yours. I've been talking about mine for 10 years.
Well, you know, when I was in academia, I was writing too. So writing has never been a problem for me. It's just for me, it was making the decision to write these stories. And I felt once I had written the stories about American Indians, then I needed to tell the stories of the people of Central America. And I had originally gone to Central America and Mexico. There were two 19th century explorers who went to, they started out in what is now Belize, but at that time it was British Honduras. And they were in search of the great cities of the Maya that they had only heard rumors about. And so I had read their book when I was a teenager, and I decided that I was going to follow in their footsteps. And, of course, it took me many years and several decades to get there, but I started out in Belize City, following in their footsteps. And along the way, I met some of the most amazing people because, you know, you had Eric von Daniken and all these people coming forth with theories of ancient astronauts and how the native people could not have possibly built these magnificent cities hidden away in these jungles all these years. And so they, you know, came up with these ideas that aliens had come there and had built these cities and then abandoned them. And so, you know, I decided, and of course von Daniken and people had written this stuff without even talking to the native people. You know, is there any truth in this? So I decided that I was, along the way, since I had always planned to go to follow in their footsteps and go to these ancient cities and these sites that they had visited, while I was doing it, I was going to do some of my own research to find out if any of these stories were true. And that's when the book is going to talk about the sky gods and other creatures when I walk with the ancients. And so I heard about chupacabras, I heard about the little people, I heard about, you know, the Bigfoot and the aliens and the sky gods. So, you know, it's just quite an adventure, and it took me 2 years to actually complete this journey of mine, and I fell in love with the people and particularly the Maya, and and their ancient cities. And I think in another life I'm going to be an archaeologist and come back to my life there.
Yeah, it's a beautiful culture, no doubt about it. And when y'all mentioned the light beings in my early 20s, in my wilder days when I was messing around with the cult and reading everything spiritual, and when I say I'm messing around with a cult, I was just reading a lot of stuff. I wasn't doing crazy stuff like, sacrificing goats or anything. I was just reading anything to get my hands on. But I saw beings of light, and they were in the sky, almost like a star, but when you looked at them and other people with me, it was like humanoid shaped, and it was golden, and it was like a star, but it was like it had arms and legs, and other people saw them with me. We had binoculars, and we were looking at them, and they were trying to communicate with us telepathically. And later I found this book called Roots of Consciousness by Jeffrey Mishlove, and there was a quote from an astronomist from a long time ago, and in it said, "Some stars are indeed deep." And I found it right after seeing that. It was like they led it to me. And they're luminous beings in shamanism. They talk about that a lot. And I wonder if they're us without our skin. Or like that movie Cocoon. I saw that movie Cocoon after that, where, Ron Howard, Opie from, what's that show, Mayberry and all that stuff, did that movie Cocoon about the people that when they lose their skin, they're beings of light. And I definitely believe, I've seen them, that there's beings of light, and my theory on that is that they're us. Maybe that's what our soul looks like on some level. That we're beings of light, and they're just, having a human experience, as Wayne Dyer would say, the self-help dude that I read a lot of.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
Familiar with him?
Yeah, he's great. And I wonder if they're, all around our planet and other dimensions around our planet, and that's like heaven, and that's just us without our bodies. It makes sense to me on some level. I don't know. For me, it makes sense. And then I've heard there's another lady, I can't remember her name. She's in the crop circles. I don't remember her name because I'm bad with memory, but she saw a spear of light make a crop circle and said that it was a being of light. And it was making crop circles. So there's definitely something to those beings of light, no doubt about it. I definitely believe in the beings of light because I've seen them for starters, and then there's so many other correlating stories about them. And maybe that's who we are. Yeah.
I saw them in the jungles of Guatemala, in fact.
It's just amazing.
Honduras.
That's possibly what we are when we're without a body. Which I don't know if that's, it makes sense to me, That's what star people are, beings of light, I guess, on many levels. Well, I guess there's different kinds of star people, different races or whatever. But, I don't know where JoJo is. How much time do we got left there, JoJo? Wakey, JoJo. Wakey, Paw. We got a chat room on Pal Talk that's filled with people, so we got 8 minutes, okay. Andy, any departing comments?
No. Let me think here. No, it's just been fascinating hearing these stories. They sound great, and I can't wait to read the book. Sounds really good. The beings of light, though. You remember that picture I took one summer ago? I posted on my blog as this shape-shifting light. And one of the shots I took of it, it looks like a Birdman, but it looks like a flying person. And there was a Buddhist monk who claimed he could turn into Mothman, basically, or the Thunderbird or Garuda, and that he said there were others that could do this. These monks, practiced projecting their consciousness or their bodies and they like to use the ball of light because it's the most efficient way to send themselves somewhere. But when they get to the other end, they can appear as themselves. And so my friend Harriet, who's a Mothman witness, after I told her about this guy and she saw his picture, she said he had been showing up at her house, his image, that she recognized him. So that's a pretty strange story. And then the guy disappeared. He wrote a book called Cities of Lightning. And then he just disappeared, and the publisher doesn't know what happened to him.
The author disappeared?
Yeah.
Wow.
He was in a monastery in New York. His name's Samudranath. I actually have his book, and I have his picture. What's the name of his book? I have his book, and I have a picture of his face in most of my books. I have the same set of pictures that show his face, the face in the window that my sister took a picture of. He kind of looks like that. He kind of looks like Northwest Indian depictions of, I forget the name of the deity, but it's a man in black type of deity. He also looks like Richard Cold. One picture we think maybe of this strange man in black, Indrid Cold, who I happen to think was a real person, but a lot of people have transliterated into, this interdimensional being.
I've gotten a lot of readers have written to me, through my website and have told me all kinds of stories about men in black and people that they had seen and shapeshifters. So it's rather interesting,
Yeah, they're out there. They can form from oily black vapors and things.
Yeah.
There's planetary spirits, and then there's these, the more enlightened Garuda-like spirits that sort of police things, I think, according to this monk.
And I've had several people write to me and tell me about experiences. They said, when we read your book, I had a truck driver, for example, write to me, and he said, I never will forget the time my father came home and told me about an experience very similar to what your interviewees told you. And he said, my father was so frightened, he stopped his big semi along the side of the road, and he crawled underneath the semi, hiding from these entities that were hovering over his truck for fear they were going to take him. And he said, I never will forget. He said, I was 14 years old, and when he came home, he was absolutely scared to death. And it took him a while before he could even go back on the road again. He was so terrified from his experience.
Wow. There was that weird story where something flew over a bloodmobile. It wasn't Mothman. A lot of people have claimed that this was Mothman, but if you go back and read the actual original story by Keel, it was a mechanical device that was flying that had arms on it, and it was trying to reach down and grab the truck, this bloodmobile. And, yeah. And somehow it's turned into Mothman, but I found the original article from '67, and it's clearly described as a mechanical flying saucer device.
So you apparently have spent a lot of time in West Virginia then?
Well, yeah, I grew up there, yeah.
Oh, where did you grow up in West Virginia? I went to West Virginia University, so that's the reason I was curious.
Well, I didn't go there. I grew up in Charleston, and I went to Marshall for 2 years.
You went to Marshall, yeah. Yeah, I graduated from I got my master's at West Virginia University.
Yeah, I love it up in that area of the state.
I do too.
I'd like to live up there. That'd be nice.
All right, everybody. It's time to end this Joker. Had a great time listening to these stories. I want to get you back on when you get your other books out. And the name of the book for our audience is Encounters with Star People, Untold Stories of American Indians from Artie Six Killer Clark. And you can pick it up at anomalousbooks.com, and you can also visit Artie at sixkiller.com if you have any stories to share.
Write me at Artie at sixkiller.com.
Groovy. And next week's Audrey Starborn with Michael Jagers, a zombie from Walking Dead. So, and Andy, any departing words as we close out this bad boy?
It's just been great. I've enjoyed talking to both of you.
I loved it. All right, everybody.
And you're going to get my email. Well, Andy, you have my email address now. So, no, make sure you contact me because I'd like to do some follow-up with you.
Yeah, it'd be great to do a little write-up of some Bigfoot stuff. I think Jeffrey was mentioning for our Bigfoot book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll make sure. I'll give him your email if he didn't pick it up. When we were
now, you're out
earlier.
in Washington now, right?
Yes, and there's lots of interesting stories up here, too.
Oh, yeah, because, you know, the Yakima, they have the sick people, I think, you know, that they tell their legends. They have the legends of the sick people.
Oh, boy. I haven't heard of that. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, I've come across quite a few stories there, so luck.
All right.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
All right, you're welcome, everybody.
And thank
have
you
a
to
good
all
weekend.
your listeners, and I hope they read my book.
They will. It's great. It's worth checking out. Everybody have a good St. Patrick's Day. And I was joking earlier that St. Patrick drove out the snakes from Ireland, and this year's the year of the snake, Chinese astrology, so he may have his work cut out for him this year. Everybody have a good night. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Welcome to UFO Think Tank with your